Population Matters is a UK-based campaigning organisation that believes that if we are to solve our multifaceted global crises, we must look at them holistically and recognise their interconnectedness. We campaign to promote sustainable levels of population and consumption and are committed to the principle that any activity to address population must be within a women-centred, rights-based framework that wholly respects bodily autonomy and reproductive choice. As we know, reproductive rights are neither established nor secure. Many forces threaten them. Population Matters has recently been looking at threats coming from two different perspectives: the political drive to coercively raise or lower population and birth rates. Alistair, can you introduce yourselves to us and tell us about the political drive to increase birth rates and how this is threatening reproductive rights?
Thanks very much, Kat. I'm head of campaigns at Population Matters. And last year, we just started seeing stories coming through from various places about restrictions on abortion, on contraception, and the like. And we thought this was something that we should be looking into further. And we produced in November of last year this report, Welcome to Gilead, which looks at examples of attempts to reduce and control reproductive rights in many countries across the world, with a specific goal, or the stated goal, of helping to increase birth rates. I think we're all aware here that there are many places in the world where fertility rates are low, where population growth is slowing or is coming down. And unfortunately, what we're seeing is that for a number of politicians, this is perceived as a threat so significant that they feel that measures should be taken which are contrary to human rights in order to address it, or at least they are justifying measures in that way. So what our research looked at a number of countries, and I'll just briefly summarize some of the things that we saw. In authoritarian countries, we looked at China and Iran is probably the most severe case just now. As many of you may know, back in the 80s, Iran actually had a very successful and effective family planning program, which, despite the restrictions that were there, was in many ways quite progressive. However, in recent years, Iran has become concerned about its declining population. Amongst other reasons, for geopolitical reasons, they are concerned about national security, and it's become a priority of the Iranian government to raise that. What in practice that has involved is severe restrictions on abortion, on contraception access, on sex education, and in fact, last year, the Office for the High Commission of Human Rights issued a statement of concern about Iran's approach in this area. What we've seen since then is regular comments from the senior leadership in Iran about the necessity of increasing birth rate and just an increasing tightening of controls there. In China, what we're seeing now is, again, as people are very familiar with, China had a coercive one-child policy for a long time. It now has a very low fertility rate, and it now has increased its policy to a three-child policy, which is still a controlling policy. But what we're actually seeing is a rhetoric from the Chinese government about how having babies is a matter of state and national interest, not simply a matter of individual choice for women and families. And what we're seeing is a restriction again in that space. It's now very difficult to obtain vasectomy, for instance, in China, and there aren't rules against it, but the message is being conveyed to the hospitals about that. I should say that actually, I should have said in Iran, getting a voluntary sterilization is almost impossible for people of either sex now. So in China, we're seeing this, again, tightening of the space in these authoritarian regimes, but it's not limited to those. And for China, I talked about security concerns. In Iran, in China, it's economic concerns. What we're also seeing in Europe is a tightening as well. And one of the critical drivers that we're seeing in Europe is our nationalistic interests, where countries and politicians are concerned about the threat, as they perceive it, of declining population, but they also want to preserve the indigenous ethnic population as they see it. So there's opposition to multiculturalism, there's opposition to immigration, there's also a socially conservative agenda, which is patriarchal, which is often anti-LGBTQI rights, which in many ways is antithetical to the values that we would hold here. And what we've seen, as many of you will be aware, the country in Europe with the most stringent controls on abortion is in Poland, where there is a strong influence from a section of the Catholic Church there. And the issue of reducing population has been used as a justification. We've also seen this in Hungary, and many of you may be familiar with the leader of Hungary's extreme right-wing leader, Viktor Orban, who talks consistently about the threat to life in Hungary of not just a declining birth rate, but the threat of immigrants, of people from other cultures. And he says it's vital that we preserve the Hungarian people, that we don't want immigration to solve this problem. We want to preserve the Hungarian people. And so, and he's a proponent of the Great Replacement theory, which is specifically that people from non-white, non-Christian cultures are trying to outbreed the white indigenous cultures in order to overtake them demographically. And what we've seen in Hungary is that Hungary is an area where abortion has been well established and well protected for a long time. But some small restrictions, and just very recently, Hungary has introduced a new requirement that any woman wanting an abortion must listen to the fetal heartbeat before doing so, which I understand also applies in some US states. And anti-abortion activists in Hungary have celebrated this as the first step towards restricting abortion rights. So we're seeing those things there. We've also seen even in the campaign against Roe v. Wade that people are referring to the low birth rate in the US as well as one of the justifications for it. And then the last thing I just want to flag is that all these warning signs we saw in Hungary, the next area for concern is Italy. The new government, Brothers of Italy in Italy, has identified the demographic challenge in Italy, low birth rate, as being their #1 priority. This is a party which is right-wing, which shows every signs of being inclined to a coercive approach. Nothing has happened yet, but it's an area where all of us concerned about sexual and reproductive rights should be paying attention. That's my summary.
Thanks so much, Alistair. And a reminder that in order to read the whole report, you can go to populationmatters.org on our resources page and find the online report of what Alistair has in his hand just now. We also have joining us Debanjana. Thank you so much. And please introduce yourself. Debanjana commissioned, Population Matters commissioned Debanjana to investigate the situation in India regarding policies intended to reduce population growth by imposing penalties on people with more than 2 children. Can you tell us about this work?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Katrina and Population Matters for having me here. And I'm Debanjana Chaudhary. I am an SRHR advocate. I work in the space of safe abortion rights and gender rights. And in my work, when I was given this opportunity to find out more about the Indian scenario, I would like to share a bit we need to start from the beginning. In India itself, family planning program is a huge success, but it started from a very medical angle. It was never choice-based or rights-based. It came from a point of reducing maternal mortality, reducing deaths during childbirth, deaths during pregnancy. So that's where it came from. And it is interesting to note that very sneakily, there are many coercive policies that are creeping into the fabric of the family planning program in India. And certain bills are passed by certain states in India. So in India, health is a state subject. So there is a central law, a central agency, and of course, there are states agencies. So what happens is that these states are passing certain bills and legislations which again try to weaponize women's bodies. They try to restrict the number of children without any choice. Of course, it's a matter of choice whether you want to have children, how many children you want to have, and how you want to have. But the state policies have been impeding the rights and choice of women. And there are certain states which are stating that if you have more than 2 children, then you are going to lose out on a nice government job. You are going to lose out on government subsidies, which means horrific implications for already socio-economically backward, marginalized communities and sections of the society.
And we'd be interested to hear more as well in relation to the Welcome to Gilead report and what Alistair was just telling us around, perceived national interests and ethnic prejudices. How does that resonate with the work that you've done and the linkages that you see there?
See, there was a time in the Indian family planning program which was extremely coercive, and it boomeranged. And how? And that is why, because what happened in the 70s, vasectomy is not popular at all. The burden of contraception is absolutely skewed towards women and girls in India. And it'll be naive to say that, yes, these coercive measures that we see creeping into the fabric of family planning programs in India is not targeted at certain sections of the society. Of course, it is. It is more towards making sure it drives again from what, Alistair, you pointed out in the Gilead report. There are nationalist agendas. Most of the countries these days are becoming extremely right-wing. They're thinking about themselves, and that is where most of the family planning programs are coming from. But it'll be a shame for a country like India, which has done great progress in family planning, to even embark into a journey of creepy coercive measures.
Thank you so much, Devanjana. And it would be great, in the final moments that we have here, to hear from you both, some thoughts on what we can do as the SRHR community here at ICFP on combating these challenges to reproductive rights.
If I may take that first, I think that traditionally we have been aware of the threats to reproductive rights coming from an antenatal perspective, and that we maybe aren't equipped to recognize the threats, particularly which are emerging in low fertility countries, which traditionally, or relatively speaking, have low unmet need. And so threats are occurring in places like Poland and Hungary. Obviously, we're all conscious of what's taking place in the US at the moment. Threats that are taking place in Italy are things that we should be more attuned to. And I think if you look at that sort of nexus that I was talking about of anti-immigrant, anti-multicultural, authoritarian, socially conservative, you put those things together and there's a warning sign for the SRHR community that not always, but sometimes coercive measures may be taken. So I think the first thing is to be vigilant, and of course to keep asserting in all circumstances the fundamental principle of women-centered, rights-based, choice-based sexual and reproductive rights universally in all circumstances. So it's very much paying attention to an emerging threat at the moment, which hopefully we can prevent emerging further.
Yeah, thank you. I couldn't resonate it more. So yes, of course, rights-based, choice-based, absolutely, being in the principles of rights-based framework. What we see and what we need to do is that we see that the policies around SRHR come without women at the center at all. But when it comes to implementation, they are the ones who are targeted as the implementation, models. For example, if there is something, if there is a new product or a new contraceptive method that is available, it'll probably be for the woman. It'll not be for the man. So we need to change that thinking. There has to be behavioral change, and keeping women right at the center, being as rights-based, and of course, remember, choice is the key.
That's a great note to end.
So just before we go, just to say also, Devanjana's report, or part of it, is available on Population Matters website, as is the Gilead report. So do please look out for it.
And another note that in 15 minutes, our friend and colleague Nandita Bajaj from Population Balance will be speaking further about the pronatalism threat to reproductive rights. So do stay tuned, and thank you everyone. And thank you to you both, Devanjana and Alistair.
Thank you, Katrina.